There are a million films about ancient Egypt today, and most of them are all stuck within this echo chamber, repeating the same information over and over. There are a few that bring forward very insightful new discoveries, but there are practically none which focus on the most important question in all of Egypt, which is what is underneath the Giza Plateau. In this film, we can finally answer that question. For the first time in human history, we're bringing forward photographs and video footage from inside tunnels and chambers underneath the Giza Plateau. We've found evidence of many tunnels in an entire network which connects directly to chambers underneath the Sphinx and inside the Great Pyramid. We're also here to share eyewitness accounts of discoveries that have never been made known to the world. And beyond that, we're here to disclose what I believe to be potentially the greatest archaeological discovery in human history. The temple complex, completely buried under the Giza Plateau and connected directly to the Great Pyramid. This discovery was made by a collective effort from an international team led by William Brown and his wife, Lucina Lobos Brown. And this is the story of that discovery. My first time visiting the plateau, I was shocked by how many entrances to the underground were completely visible and locked with gates or doors. They were all over the place, all around the Sphinx. There was just hundreds of them. My name is Trevor Grassi, and I've been studying ancient cultures for my whole life. And the last 2 decades, I've had a particular focus on the Sphinx, the Great Pyramids, and what is said to lie below the surface of Giza. I first became interested in the Hall of Records in 2006 when I met John Anthony West, and he became a very dear friend. In the years that followed, he guided me towards many other researchers and authors who had all made very interesting discoveries that contributed to this overall mystery. John wrote a book called Serpent in the Sky, which was published in 1979. And this was the first book that really broke apart the esoteric symbolism of Egypt and provided a foundation upon which any real study of the civilization must begin with. If you don't start with an understanding that there's a deep level of symbolism that works on several levels actually, you're not going to be able to understand the riddle that is Egypt. Everything in Egypt is a code, and John gave us a means to begin deciphering that code and to begin answering that riddle. He noticed that Schwaller de Lubeck's had written casually in a single line in one of his books that it was very clear the Sphinx was weathered by precipitation, by heavy rainfall for millennia. And so John took that idea and put it to the test with the help of geologist, geophysicist Dr. Robert Schoch, who ended up joining John in Egypt and analyzing the weathering patterns on the Sphinx courtyard. His analysis of the Sphinx proved quite definitively that this was in fact a textbook example of prolonged precipitation-based weathering pattern. It showed round vertical fissures that were carved down as water poured in from the entire Giza Plateau into the courtyard of the Sphinx, which is subterranean. It's dug into the ground, and so its courtyard was weathered by streams of water pouring down into it. This proves that the Sphinx is much earlier than traditional Egyptologists claim. It's said that the Sphinx was created by the pharaoh Khafra, as well as the middle of the 3 pyramids. The Great Pyramid is attributed to Khufu, the pharaoh who in Greek was called Cheops or Cheops. The middle pyramid to his successor son Khafra, and the Sphinx as well is attributed to Khafra, who in Greek was called Khephren. And the third pyramid was attributed to Menkaure, who is Khafra's successor. We don't know if these pharaohs actually built the pyramids or simply renovated them, but it's clear that they had a very prominent role in what we see of these pyramids today. Evidence of the weathering on the Sphinx in its courtyard would suggest that it came from an entirely different era. Robert Schoch initially found evidence to suggest that it was at least several thousand years before the first dynasty. Now, Khafra and Khufu and Menkaure were of the fourth dynasty. With further research, they ended up pushing the date back even further. In 1992 and 1993, John brought Schoch to the Sphinx, as well as seismologist Dr. Thomas Dobecki, and they were attempting to analyze the subsurface strata of the Sphinx to find any additional weathering patterns that related to the weathering they saw above ground. They did ground-penetrating scans around the Sphinx's body. What they found were multiple anomalies which indicated man-made chambers under the Sphinx itself. They described one chamber they called Anomaly A, which was rectangular and appeared to be a man-made chamber about 25 feet underneath the Sphinx's left front paw. Dr. Zahi Hawass is the former Minister of Antiquities in Egypt, and though he's retired from that position, even today it's nearly impossible to get access to any site in Egypt for research without Zahi's permission. Hawass ended up carrying out a project to do core drilling samples all around the body of the Sphinx, including underneath the front left paw. This is an image from Manu Safezadeh based on a diagram from Mark Lehner, and we can see exactly where the chamber is and exactly where Zahi had drilled, and he clearly just missed the chamber by potentially a couple feet, if that. However, Dr. Hawass took this as evidence that no chamber existed underneath the left paw. We know that there are at least 6 entrances on the body of the Sphinx itself. There's one on top of the head, one on the back, 2 on the sides, one by the tail, and one directly between the 2 front paws, behind the dream stele. Each of these could potentially lead to further discoveries, but we're told that none of them leads to anything specific. Professor George Reisner had carried out extensive excavations at the Sphinx and claimed to have gone into the head into a chamber inside the head which led down into a much larger chamber in the body. In 1913, an article was released in a publication called The Sphere with an illustration attributed to G. Braun, and it showed this chamber in the head leading to the chamber in the body and leading elsewhere from there. Soon after this article came out, it was covered up and called a hoax. However, we know that Reisner did spend months excavating at the Sphinx. So was he just inside a tiny chamber that was only a few feet wide in the head the whole time, making it up? It seems unlikely. In a book called Scenario of the Photodrama of Creation, Charles Taze Russell published a similar image in 1914, the year after Reisner's image came out. The chamber in the head, we're told, goes down only a few feet. The one in the back, we're told, is just an access shaft to the fracture that's running through the body of the Sphinx with a hatch built on top of it. The 2 in the sides have both been completely cemented over and covered up. The entrance by the tail has a lot of interesting stories. In 2023, Jimmy Corsetti released a video that leaked images of the upper part of this tunnel system, which is blocked off with wood. This may be the upper part that Mark Lehner had described in his thesis, Archaeology of an Image, which came out in 1991. And he shows this tunnel going up several meters up to a point where there's a lot of weathering on the core body of the Sphinx, but inside the casing repair stones. We have at least one account of this tunnel from Elena Denon, and I've spoken with her about this. She also published a story in her book, The Cedars, and she says that in 1998, Zahi invited her down into this tunnel and actually told her that it leads to a long hall at the bottom, underneath the Sphinx, exactly as Professor Reisner had described. Elena also describes entering into the chamber behind the dream stele directly under the Sphinx's chin, and saying that it led to a stairwell going down to a long colonnade, which led to additional tunnels. In some earlier excavations, we're told that this chamber doesn't go very far either, that it's just small, but perhaps there is a hidden continuation of that passage somewhere that hasn't been found yet. Hawass and Lehner both excavated these tunnels in the 1990s, and Hawass declared excitedly that he was exploring this tunnel for the first time, leading to unknown discoveries beneath the Sphinx. However, in 1998, he completely changed his story and suddenly said that there was absolutely nothing underneath the Sphinx. Dr. Hawass said that the tunnel by the tail actually extended down under the Sphinx to a large hall. So we have to wonder why he suddenly changed his story and said there's nothing. If these tunnels lead to nothing significant, then we could easily have proof of that by seeing video footage going into the extent of the cave, filming all the walls, showing that there are no additional passages or excavatable materials like dirt or sand that could be removed to show more passages. We've never seen any video footage like this. We have a great deal of evidence concerning these tunnels in and around the body of the Sphinx itself, and we'll return to that subject in the future. But for the time being, it's important to acknowledge there are at least 6 entrances that go to an unknown extent, because we've never seen the end of them with video footage. It's never been proven that they don't lead to further spaces. My first time in Egypt was on a tour with Dr. Robert Schoch and his wife Catherine Ulysses and several other Egyptian guides. And so I had 2 weeks to see all the temples of Egypt with Dr. Schoch himself and ask him all the questions I had for him. Aside from the work of John West and Dr. Robert Schoch, there's practically no information that's ever been released about chambers underneath the Sphinx or the Giza Plateau. So I learned everything I could from John and Schoch, and I continued to research the subject on my own.
The chamber that we found was under the left paw, so that's the left paw.
Their discovery corresponded with a prediction made by the renowned psychic Edgar Cayce, who said that underneath the front paws of the Sphinx could be found an entrance to the Hall of Records. These records were said to have ancient technology and knowledge from the civilization of Atlantis. It's important to understand when talking about the Hall of Records that I'm not just talking about the information that comes from Edgar Cayce. I believe these records take many forms and they're located in many places. In fact, they're all over the world in many different countries. But I think that Egypt is the place where the records are most complete. Some of them are actually above ground and visible for us to see right now. I believe all the temples of Egypt and all the pyramids are part of the Hall of Records itself. They're part of the archive of information that was meant to be preserved. The information is actually demonstrated through the use of geometry and mathematics and their understanding of vibration and harmony, frequency. All of this is information that can be reverse engineered essentially from the monuments themselves if we know how to read that symbolism. And it could be used to rebuild this ancient sacred science based on the mathematics they used and their understanding of the universal laws. At the same time, there are other parts of the records which are actually preserved underground, carved in relief on stone walls and written in hieroglyphs, and even pure information stored in ways that can be accessed telepathically. And these chambers and areas that contain these records have all sorts of protections on them. We have many accounts of expeditions and excavations from all throughout our history, especially into the 19th and 20th century, that describe this endless maze of tunnels under the plateau, and even describe beautiful, elaborate carvings and reliefs all over these stone tunnel walls. Over the last 2 decades, I've collected a massive body of evidence that suggests the Hall of Records underneath the Giza Plateau is a historically documented fact and not a myth or a legend. We have evidence from the Egyptian civilization themselves that suggests that their own history does extend much further into the past than we've given them credit for. Some of this evidence includes the Edfu building texts, the Turin papyrus, and the Palermo stone. These sources tell us that Egyptian history extends much further into the past than the first dynasties, and many of them correlate very well with Plato's account of Atlantis and Edgar Cayce's information. The dream stele of Thutmose IV was placed there when Thutmose had a dream that the Sphinx actually spoke to him and told him that if he cleared the sand away from its base and restored it, he would become pharaoh. On this stele, we see a depiction of what appears to be a chamber or archive underneath the Sphinx itself. And we also find the name of the Sphinx, which is Horem Akhet, which means Horus of the Horizon. We actually have a record from the Egyptians themselves that describe this library or archive being in the very same location. In a text called A Hymn to Shu, translated by E.A. Wallace Budge, we find a direct reference to this secret or royal archive being accessed directly under the Sphinx's paws. A will hath been done into writing by the Lord of Kemenu, Thoth, the scribe of the library of Ra-Harmachis, in the hall of the divine house or temple of Anu, Heliopolis, established, perfected, and made permanent in the hieroglyphs under the feet of Ra-Harmachis, and he shall transmit it to the son of his son forever and ever. Ra-Harmachis is the Greek version of the name Horem Akhet, which is the name of the Sphinx itself. This passage tells us that there is in fact a divine library containing the words of Thoth in hieroglyphs, and it's stored in a house or temple under the feet of the Sphinx. There's no other way to take it. There's no other interpretation. Dr. Manu Safzadeh shares this example in his book Under the Sphinx, where he also shares a great deal of evidence to suggest that this Hall of Records or secret archive was actually buried underneath the Sphinx. It's beyond the scope of this single film to present all of the evidence I've found that suggests the Hall of Records to be real. However, I do intend to explain all of that evidence in the future. At the moment, there's a situation at the Giza Plateau that is very time sensitive, and so I believe there's one story that needs to be told immediately, and this is the story of William Brown. I first came across William in 2020, and I noticed that he was sharing ground-penetrating radar scans of the Giza Plateau, which showed chambers and tunnels. This is what I had been keeping my eyes open for many years. I'd always been looking for actual physical hard evidence of the actual structures that are underground, whether or not they're part of the Hall of Records. The more I spoke with William, the more I realized he had an incredibly important story to tell, and that he had gone 10 times further than anyone I've ever seen who was actually attempting to get to the bottom of this situation and actively attempting to work at Giza to find these chambers, find these tunnels, do ground penetrating scans, and actually excavation projects. Bill's been to Egypt 74 times in the last 2 decades, and he's been very deep underground in these labyrinths of tunnels underneath the Giza Plateau. Some aspects of this story may be difficult for you to believe, and it may go too far into the realm of the metaphysical or supernatural. However, you don't need to believe these parts to see the overall implications of the story we're presenting, and we do have a great deal of evidence to prove the bigger point that we're trying to make here. I believe it's important not to censor this story, but to tell it completely, in full, and you can take or leave any parts of it you like. Some of this work is pretty dangerous. Some of it's not easy to talk about. So I became very interested in what he was doing, and I told him I would like to make a film about this. So we met up in January of 2023, spent about 2 weeks at Giza at that time, and I ended up meeting him again in November and December of 2023, and we got additional interviews and footage on location and put this story together. He'd been working on attempting to get official permissions for excavations at multiple locations on the Giza Plateau, places where we already know there are tunnels and chambers. In January of 2023, it sounded as if, even if it was a small chance, there was a potential that the permit would come through for the project. And so if that happened and we got into these tunnels, we would have the right to film everything we had access to. So I said there's no way I would not be there if there's even a chance of that, even if it's a slim one. There's a very time-sensitive situation at the Giza Plateau right now because they are demolishing all the villages to the east of the plateau. And by the year 2030, this is going to contain an enormous area, which they plan to reconstruct into an entire plaza and museum, hotels. So we need to work quickly in order to achieve the goals that we have. In 2021, they demolished much of the village of Nazlet El Saman, which is immediately east of the wall of the plateau itself. And so in this area, there's a lot of things that we can find underground which connect directly into the Giza Plateau. I plan to release additional films in the future that can explain more of the context behind this story, because it's a huge story and it can't possibly fit into a single film. But what I find to be most important is Bill's own testimony and the story of what he has done at the Giza Plateau over the last 20 years. He's done a lot of work there. He's been deep underground and he's seen a lot of things that I believe the world deserves to hear about.
The tunnel from the Sphinx's paw that Edward Casey talks about goes into this room right here, which is totally connected this way and that way and that way. So it's like the major hub. Subway, New York. I know one of the entrances, I can show you the stone, and it takes 4 men to move the stone. When they move the stone, you can go in. You can actually see from here going to underneath here. It's a big room down here. We have the drawings of all the underground. There's many caverns right here. So we have the drawing that shows everything is here and where it goes. And you know, you can see all of these things. Those used to be doorways. And people that used to live here before it became a tourist trap used to go inside those and have lunch. There was nothing secret. The only reason why they've done it and covered it up is to get money from the tourists. And then the tourists give them money and then they take them there. And so that's actually the underground location where the archaeologists have been working for 25 years. It's their main office entrance, and from there they can go into other tunnels. And the tunnel goes from here over to the Tomb of Osiris. My first time that I decided to come to Egypt was in 2000, and at that time I was doing very heavy into meditation and been guided to come for whatever reason. I really didn't have an interest in Egypt until around 1997, 1998, when I had an experience of what I call my walk-in, which was greater awareness of who I am and why I'm in this lifetime, in this timeline. Upper middle class, I was an engineer, making a lot of money. My wife was a director at the hospital. We had 3 kids, 3 automobiles, 5 insurance plans, you know, the whole American dream. And I was there. I ended up with a divorce within the year because of my walk-in experience. My wife said that I was not the same person, and I wasn't. And so I ended up leaving everything behind. 2003, I arrived in Egypt with plans to live here for the rest of my life. And where I'm staying in this hotel right across the wall at the Giza Plateau, the high mountain range area, hillside, I meditated for 30 days. And I had done a 2-week tour while I was here with a tour group and went up and down the Nile, all the temples, and I became totally aware of either a lifetime or some memories or whatever you want to call it, of some lifetime, ancient times in Egypt. So I went back to my job and I turned in my letter of resignation. I was an engineer for 25 years and I completely gave up that physical world of income, security, everything. I was an engineer. I even had a contract that I didn't even have to wear a tie. And so everything was going really well. And finally I went to my boss and I said, after 3 trips in 2005, I said, I'm moving permanently to Egypt to live for the rest of my life. And they said, okay. And so I came here. And so in 2005, right after Christmas, I got a visitor, loud voice, it was in the middle of the night, woke me up and spoke to me, and it just said the name Atlan, A-T-L-A-N. And I didn't understand. I mean, I was asleep and I woke up hearing this name and I didn't understand. I thought I was dreaming. And then about a minute later, it was even louder. And this time I knew that it was very real. And it said, Atlan. And I said, who am I talking to? And then it said for the 3rd time in a very loud, demanding, commanding voice, like, you're not going to refuse this offer. Like the grandfather says, I'm going to make you an offer you can't refuse. And when he said, Atlan, you promised. And when they said that, I said, I understand.
Atlan, I know that's a name that Edgar Casey had used in some of his readings. He was talking about an Atlantean figure who was important.
I'm Atlan. There's 3 of us, just like Toth. Okay. But I am Atlan. Okay. I'm the Atlantean from Atlantis that came and helped found Egypt. But I don't want to talk about that.
Okay.
There's no the whole problem is when we find these records are my records. Okay. Now I'm not Toth. There's a difference between me and Toth. Okay. And Edgar Casey talks about 3 people showing up. Okay. I was one of them. Okay, in other words, I was the program of who this 3rd person was about. And when they stood up there, Edgar Casey did the prediction about me of, who I am and why I am here in Egypt, and that's why I'm here today.
Yeah, you told me yesterday you also worked with Drunvalo Melchizedek, who is associated with Thoth as well. He
right.
said
back in the 2000 time period when I was working in the Rockville area, I was working with Drunvalo Melchizedek, his cousin Slim Sperling.
Slim Sperling introduced to the world what we call tensor rings. And this was something I was very interested in. Before I ever met William, I was using this technology to build sacred geometric designs, and William was essentially doing the same thing. He was using tensor rings to create healing beds within sacred geometric structures, such as icosahedrons made of wood. So this was already a shared interest between both of us, and Slim Sperling was the first one to bring this technology to the world.
And I actually met Slim Sperling here We went to the Solar Cross and etc. And that's why the Solar Cross is so important to me. So because I've come here and I access that information, that's how I'm able to do and design, build the projects that I'm doing in Poland. I would pray, meditate every day on the top of the hill over here, and I would say, why am I here? Why am I here? And he said, to learn about love. And I said, I know what love is. I was married for 25 years. And he said, no, you didn't learn what love is. And you're here to learn about love. And I'm going, okay, fine. And I said, how's that going to happen? They said, well, in 30 days you'll understand. So for 30 days I meditated every day. I fasted. During that 5-month period I was here, I lost 23 pounds. What happened after the 30 days, I was doing my research after I meditated in the morning, and then I would do archaeological research here. And I had spoken with the Egyptians, and we were doing ground penetrating radar, officially working with the Egyptians, and we did 9 different locations at that time. Well, some of the people, this company from Poland came, and they wanted to work with me on the GPR, so I agreed to give them all the information from the Sphinx. We did ground penetrating radar all along the Sphinx Causeway, from the upper temple doorway all the way down to the rump of the Sphinx, and we scanned all of that. Those scans have appeared on Discovery Channel and in National Geographic. The Tomb of Osiris area along the causeway, we had found one anomaly, several anomalies. And the very first day in February, when they did the first test case, starting at the upper temple up at the second pyramid, when they actually started the first test, there was an anomaly underground that was very energetic, as I would say. Nobody's been able, even today, to define it. It was very energetic, and it shut down all of their computer equipment instantly. They saw an image appear on the video, on the computer screen, and they said all of a sudden everything it wiped out their computer too. And nobody knew, and the computer and the equipment and everything they actually had to go back and recalibrate everything. All of the equipment, the computer programs, everything. They had to recalibrate everything. So what would cause that? Nobody's been able to say, and nobody even talks about it, except for me. And to this day, they don't deny it. They just, Egyptians are very good at not denying, but not replying. We found another anomaly between that anomaly and the Tomb of Osiris in the middle of the Sphinx Causeway. We found 3 anomalies along there, and those anomalies have appeared on National Geographic and on the Discovery Channel, reported by other people that have taken my information, which I give freely, and I expect some kind of credit for it. They all took the credit for it. Nobody mentioned my name whatsoever. Egyptians won't allow them to mention my name.
The Osiris shaft, or the Osiris tomb, has 3 levels with shafts leading down to successive chambers. The Osiris shaft was originally discovered by Professor Salim Hassan in the 1930s, and he made it down to the 2nd level. The 3rd level was flooded in his time, so he couldn't go down that far, but he told us some very useful things at that time. Hassan's excavations at Giza were very extensive, and he brought much attention to this subject. Many academics and media were reporting on it, and everyone was very excited about this secret city that had been discovered underneath the surface. One of these articles by Hamilton M. Wright says, "We have discovered a subway used by the ancient Egyptians of 5,000 years ago. It passes beneath the causeway leading between the second pyramid and the Sphinx. It provides a means of passing under the causeway from the Cheops pyramid to the pyramid of Khafre. From this subway, we have unearthed a series of shafts leading down more than 125 feet, with roomy courts and side chambers. Then, around 1935, the entire thing just went silent. Everyone stopped talking about it, attention was diverted to other projects in Egypt, and it all got covered up again. Toward the end of the 20th century, the water table was lowered considerably, and in 1998 there was an expedition led by J.J. Hurtak and Boris Said, and they went down into the third level and discovered underneath the mud the sarcophagus that is now called the Osiris tomb. Our friend Ray Grossi was part of this expedition, and he wrote a fantastic article which is called Uncovering the Lost Tomb of Osiris, Personal Reflections on an Archaeological Mystery. As soon as it was understood that they had made a discovery of extreme importance, they lost access to the site, and Dr. Hawass took over the project from there. He soon after brought in a Japanese team to excavate mud tunnels which had been discovered underneath the surface of the water, but we've never been told what they actually found. Bill Brown is the only person I have ever heard actually describe what was at the end of that tunnel and what the Japanese found during that project.
So nobody's been able to explain it, and so I came back so many times to try and understand what the anomalies were all about. Well, what we were able to find out in the 2006 filming by National Geographic's 2-hour interview at the site, they filmed me walking down to the area close to the tomb of Osiris, just on the ground area. And I am actually standing on the ground. I have my plans and my book in my hands, and I have a GPS coordinate to know exactly where I'm at, and I make a claim. And of course my book is about Atlantis, Egypt. This is why the Egyptians don't want to use my name. Okay, all right. And so I have come here to prove that Egypt was ancient Atlantis, okay? And it's pre-Atlantis, but I don't really want to go back that far right now, okay? And in that movie, I'm standing there, I said, in the near future, somebody's going to find something at this exact spot. They're going to find some casings, and inside the casings are going to be the information that we're looking for. And we're talking about Atlantis. That was in 2006. In 2009, after I gave my books to everybody, the Japanese were there at the 2006 filming by National Geographic. Everybody follows me around. Everybody knows who I was back then, what I was doing. And this person was actually, he filmed me, and he went back to the Japanese and gave them this information that somebody would find something. And so in 2009, private Japanese team went to the tomb of Osiris, down to the third level. I have the movie and the pictures, and with Hawass approved it, and they ran a camera, actually it was plastic tube, with a camera on the end. They ran it through the third level mud tunnel up to, I don't remember how many, like 50, 60, 100 meters, I'm not sure. And I had said that they would find these crystals, casings. Well, they had to push the pipe through, and they broke the cave wall of a crystal cavern. And it all shows up in the film. I have the pictures of it. And they found this crystal cave that I had talked about in 2006. And I've done that a lot here in Egypt. We found a lot of things similar to that in other different locations. And so the reason why I'm here right now is because of other information that we know about that we'll talk about in the near future. And they went back 3 times. And then when they finally got to the end with the camera, with the movie camera and everything, and it showed it shows the tunnel the tomb of Osiris is connected to the Great Pyramid and the Second Pyramid.
We believe there's a very good chance that there is actually a tunnel connection from the subterranean chamber of the Great Pyramid all the way over to the Osiris shaft, and that splits off over to the Sphinx as well. I've been inside the subterranean chamber, and for one thing, there's a well that goes down very deep from that chamber, and the chamber's already very far underground. And so there's a good chance that this well actually does have tunnel connections coming into it. But there's also a tunnel that leads directly out of the southern end of that chamber. And I've crawled down this tunnel. You have to get on all fours and crawl. And I've crawled to the end of it. It's about 40 or 50 feet. And there's no light down there. I had a flashlight, but even still, it was difficult to really tell if it ended with a natural wall or if somebody plugged it up and tried to make it look like natural rock, as if it just ended there. But why would it go 50 feet and go no further? Doesn't really make sense. I think it's very possible that that tunnel used to extend much further and went all the way to the Osiris shaft. It's also possible that the Osiris shaft tunnel connects into the well underneath the subterranean chamber, which goes down to an unknown extent, deep into the bedrock. Bill also describes a fourth level to the Osiris shaft underneath the third one.
Well, there's another level below the third level. There's a fourth level. We have the proof of it.
Oh, interesting.
Yes. Our friend went in and they did the ground penetrating radar, and it showed a room underneath it.
Wow.
They actually found another sarcophagus at the foot of the ladder that you go down now. There's two ladders there, and they had removed one of the ladders, and they uncovered a stone sarcophagus. That sarcophagus, they say, ended up on top of being the lid of the one that they found in the water, but it didn't fit. And we've done all the calculations, it does not fit. But they moved it, they say they moved it to that one. If everybody goes to the second level, Tomb of Osiris, there were 7 sarcophagus in there, there's only 2 now. Where did they go? How did they get them out of there? Okay, the shaft's not big enough. So there's gotta be another doorway. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
In Hassan's report called Excavations at Giza 1933 to 34, he reports that actually 7 sarcophagi were found in the second level. However, today there are only 2 remaining.
And maybe, just maybe, there are more shafts that aren't reported. And our information was that the reason why the 2 sarcophagus that are there now is because they are covering the top of the shafts that go down. Okay, so our friend did GPR and they found a room underneath it. Yeah, he showed me. And in 2009, April of 2009, we actually did an official conference in the University of Cairo, and I was one of the main speakers. And I had also written my first book at that time, the Giza Report 2008 was the name of the book. And I printed 25 copies of it. And it was all about the ground penetrating radar tests that we did at Giza in 2006. However, in the journal that they did in Egypt, they didn't say half of the information that was in my book. They weren't allowed to say that. They weren't allowed to tell anybody. And to this day, nobody even knows it until I gave them my book. So when I did the conference, I handed 25 copies out to all of the professors at the university. They were at the conference, and everybody read my book and asked a lot of questions.
This was carried out by the NRIAG, or the National Research Institute of Astronomy and Geophysics. They report at least 2 caves and 1 shaft, which are all within 12 to 25 meters underground. The scans were done in February of 2006, and yet the report only came out in late 2007. There was about 18 months between the two, and we believe that in this time period, the report was heavily censored. Much of the information was removed. Even still, Dr. Abbas writes, the cave-like features could be ascribed to a tunnel section of at least 3 to 5 meter width. It is like a void in the limestone rock. He later concludes, we can presume the existence of a momentous diversity of archaeological structures at the pyramid's plateau, which remain as yet unexposed. These structures could be a linked net of tunnels and shafts that may well lead to precious tombs. We believe he was able to make this very confident statement based on the fact that he had more information than what was allowed to be included in the final report. He was looking at all the scans, and he knew of many more anomalies that he wasn't allowed to report. Bill's report showed a lot of the scans that weren't included in the other report, and he showed the existence of 7 tomb-like anomalies along the Sphinx Causeway. The scan that was directly next to the Great Pyramid also found an anomaly or cave-like structure, a chamber that potentially goes into the area directly underneath the Great Pyramid.
We confirmed in 2006 GPR scans that there's an anomaly. The tunnel goes to the underground, goes into the rooms underneath the Great Pyramid. Right, and we picked it up on the GPR scan.
You'd think that ground-penetrating radar would have already been carried out at every single inch of the Giza Plateau already. However, no one has permission to work there. And when we finally do get Dr. Abbas having permission to work along the Sphinx Causeway in these very important areas, he finally does the ground-penetrating scans and his report gets heavily censored. So we have to wonder why this is happening.
And so it just so happened that I met this woman that was very interesting. We're talking to the engineers, and okay, we'll do the ground penetrating radar. And I kept seeing this lady that was with them, and I'm going like, oh, who's this lady? And my guides at the time were like really laughing very loudly at me, and like I didn't know what was going on. And all of a sudden they introduced me to her. Her name was Lucina Lobus. And I said, hi, how are you doing? And I said, okay, they want to go up on the next day on Saturday. They wanted to do some of their ground penetrating radar. And I said, okay, fine. And when I went out, she showed up with them. And for some strange reason, it's like I knew this person from many lifetimes. And we were walking around hand in hand like we were married. And she said we wanted to go to a particular tomb, which we called on the eastern side of the Great Pyramid. And I said, it's a very important tomb to me, and I want to show you. And she said, okay, let's go. And so we went over to the tomb, and we went down into the tomb, and they were recording. These people were making movies of everything, and they were recording everything. And when Lucy walked in, I was there, and all of a sudden she just started crying. And she had the memory of who I was and who she was at the time. And I, it's kind of like, I didn't know this person. I mean, she having a nervous breakdown, what's going on here? And she became so emotional, and we couldn't understand. And then the next day, she's a channeler and a massage therapist, and she does dowsing work, energy work. And we were going around doing dowsing at all the different sites, and she would take the pendulum out and say, okay, you want to GPR here. And so they ended up doing GPR in 9 different locations, which included redoing some of the ones that I had done. And she said, then they told me the story of who we were. And I'm going like, okay. And at that time, I was always an architect's son of an architect. Every lifetime I came in as son of the architect. And I was the son of the architect of Hemiuno, who is said to have built the Great Pyramid. And according to the information that we found, he taught me everything about the construction period at that time period, which I call reconstruction of the Great Pyramid. He taught me all of the techniques, and I became the architect for the second pyramid, or as we call it, the renovation of the second pyramid.
Many people may not believe in past lives or the ability to remember events from those past lives, but we do have a precedent for this type of information. The Search for Om Seti by Jonathan Cott tells the story of Dorothy Eady, who was a woman who remembered her past life in Egypt when she was with the king Seti I at Abydos. And she ended up going to Abydos temple, and she was familiar with the entire layout of the ground. She ended up pointing to specific spots on the ground, and she'd say, there's a well here, or there's a structure here. And exactly what she said was there, the archaeologists would dig down and find. And so her accuracy was absolutely proven. And she spent the rest of her life there at Abydos, and this is exactly what Lucina Lobos Brown is doing. She's able to point directly to specific spots. You dig, you find what she says is there. In the book Initiation by Elizabeth H., we find another account of a woman who remembers her past life in Egypt and describes some very interesting details.
So this woman, Lucina, she said, why don't you come visit me in Poland? I said, fine. So I went to Poland, and make a long story short, within 6 months we were married. I met her and the rest of the Polish team that was asking me to actually work for them, and to hire. They wanted to hire me as an engineer to work for them, a paid engineering position. And I said, okay. And they were at that time deciding to work at a place called Hawara, in Fayoum here in Egypt, and they wanted to do restoration of the mud brick pyramid, which is believed to be the location of the underground labyrinth system. So they were asking me, they were having a presentation in Poland, and they asked me if I'd be willing to speak.
Herodotus describes the labyrinth of Hawara having 3,000 chambers, 1,500 on the top level and 1,500 on the bottom. We have some amazing illustrations from Athanasius Kircher, who lived in the 17th century, of the Hawara labyrinth. And these may have been just based on earlier accounts and not eyewitness experience, but nevertheless they give us a very interesting idea of what it may have looked like. Hawara has always been one of my favorite mysteries in Egypt. And we have many historical accounts, not just from Herodotus, but also from Manetho, Pliny the Elder, Strabo, many others. They describe these endless chambers and passageways as being built with granite and marble, and they all have beautiful reliefs carved on them as well as paintings. The Hawara labyrinth has often been associated with the greater lore of the Hall of Records. It's thought that this might be a part of the Hall of Records. If you want to create an archive that will last through eternity, it makes more sense to carve it in stone onto the walls rather than write it in papyrus. It's very likely that all these reliefs carved in those chambers below Hawara are a part of the Hall of Records. They are a part of the archive itself.
The agreement was signed between the University of Cairo Archaeological Department and the University of Warsaw in Poland. It was a mutual agreement between Poland and Egypt, and they hired me to come and to live in Hawara. We had a villa, and I had another engineer that was with me, and so I would come in for 1 month and then go back to Poland for a month. So we alternated every month for 2.5 years. The contract went on for 2.5 years. 2007, we did all the GPR scans at Hawara. And I was in charge of, I was a site plan engineer, and we actually had to go in order to do the ground penetrating radar. We had to actually go in and set up an engineering baseline, and we had to set up an elevation. And nobody had ever done that before. And I was the first engineer to do the first official engineering survey of the entire plateau, and we actually went in, set up baselines, engineering data points, elevations, because we were going to do soil borings. After we did the ground penetrating radar, we went in and did soil borings to find out what was the problem causing the water to damage the pyramid. And so I did an official engineering water analysis program to tell them where to put the wells and how to divert the water around the pyramid. We had about 50 workers that actually went to with picks and shovels and hose and everything, and they did the typical go in and carry off the sand and dump it on another spot that we would have to pay to have that removed in the future years. Okay, and that's how they work. But we also had an academic team from the University of Warsaw, and as a part of a 2.5-year program, 50 Egyptian students from the University of Cairo got their doctorates based on that project. But nobody will talk about the labyrinth, including Dr. Rada. He got his doctorate. That's where he got his name from. Okay. And so we had the summer off, and then we came back again in November to start phase 2 to do more work. And they had actually done the ground penetrating radar tests on our first tour in November, and we did 3 different tests. Because of the site, one of the other site engineer, he directed the first 2 tests because he was the boss. And they did a perimeter ring around the outside of the pyramid. And they were basically looking for water levels. We did soil borings and to see where the water level was to be able to give them a recommendation of how to resolve the destruction of the mud brick pyramid. After doing the first 2 tests, they were analyzing them and not getting very good information. And I said, okay, I'll lead the 3rd expedition team. And I took them, and we were up where the sand covers the pyramid itself. And I said, we did a perimeter walk around that area. And after that analysis, nobody understood. We were actually GPS scanning all the rooms inside the pyramid. All the other ones was ground level water, and they didn't find anything. And we'd gone there to find proof of the labyrinth. And I knew. And so I have a very good understanding of some things. And I said, let's do it here. And they were like, what do you want? Why are you doing that? Everybody argued with me. And I just said, and my wife, at that time, I was married with Lucy, and Lucy's the boss. And Lucy says, whatever Bill says, do it. Don't argue with it. So we did it, and they started analyzing. It took a while. They analyzed the thing, and they actually found rooms inside which were part of the labyrinth system. And not only that, but we found that 1/2 of the pyramid was still buried under the sand. They thought that was the pyramid, and that's what the problem was. And the problem was not. It was that the other half of the pyramid is underground, and that's where the water's at. And how do we get rid of the water? And I did a full report, and I gave that report to Dr. Hawass at the 2009 conference, and he accepted it. Okay. And at that point, they took the project from us because of what we had found. I'm not taking the credit that it was me, because we were a team. And because of the information that we had found, we had actually dug down and found the corner of the southeast corner of the pyramid. We actually found the pyramid foundation. We were only allowed to go excavate 1 meter, 2 meters, up to 3 meters maximum outside the pyramid, as long as it didn't destroy or come in contact with the pyramid itself. And so they actually went out because of the GPR scans, and we found out where they actually dug down and found that corner. And nobody was supposed to know that. At that time, Dr. Hawass was not happy, and he took the project from us and handed it over to the French. And he basically, we really don't like to say it, but I say it anyway, the Egyptians took the report from the University of Warsaw and threw it in the trash. But they handed my report over to the next team that came, the French that came. And they accepted my report. Okay. Because it was unofficial. And because it was unofficial, they didn't have to give me credit or anything. And And I don't really care. I'm not here. I'm not in ego. My job is to tell the truth and give them the information. And so the French went in and did more work at that time. And there's been several people, but the Polish have not been allowed back to the site, even though they trying several times. So what we found about the labyrinth system did exist. We had found the entrance doorway to it. My wife Lucy had gone and drawn on the ground with a stick. We actually have the pictures and the movies of it. She said, dig here. The Egyptians dug everywhere except where she said.
Because she was dowsing that area?
Yeah, we were dowsing to we went to lots of locations. She says here, they would dig down and they would find an anomaly or a tunnel, and then they would cover it back up.
In 2015, Dr. Carmen Bolter, Klaus Dona, and Michael Donnellan presented a three-dimensional model of the chambers below ground at Hawara based on satellite scans. These scans show two levels of chambers. The blue chambers on the upper level are flooded with water, while the red chambers below are not.
When I did 5 conferences, pyramid conferences in Chicago, and she came to one and she disclosed that information at 2014, 15, 16, sometime around that time period. She showed the satellite picture of all the underground labyrinths. And in that, it actually showed that entrance. Had they dug there, they would have gained entrance to the labyrinth. And they still have not dug there to this day, because they know. And the satellite image shows 2 levels of the labyrinth, one level with water in it and the level below it with no water. You can go into it right now with no water.
5 of these chambers have a volume exceeding that of an Olympic-sized swimming pool. That's approximately the size of a department store. A single chamber of that size is quite a significant find. In 2008, another group called the Mataha expedition also carried out scans at Hawara. And what they found showed what looks like a grid-like pattern of chambers, much like Athanasius Kircher's diagrams. Dr. Robert Schock and Catherine Ulysses have actually developed a theory that essentially all the mud brick structures in Egypt are seemingly just packing materials to help preserve the temples made of stone underneath them. At Hawara, we find the mud brick pyramid actually covering over what William discovered was an actual stone pyramid underneath. And Herodotus described this pyramid as having images and large figures carved upon it. And so if it has figures carved upon it, it's clearly a stone pyramid and not mud brick. So potentially, if we remove the mud bricks at Hawara, we would find another beautiful stone pyramid with carvings and inscriptions all over its surface. The pyramid at Hawara, as well as the labyrinth, are often attributed to King Amenemhat III, who was of the 12th dynasty. However, Herodotus told us that he believed the labyrinth itself was the work of 12 different kings who lived consecutively and who were all buried inside of it. We know that the top level is not actually subterranean. It's under sand, but not underground. And so all we'd have to remove is sand to get to the top level. And the bottom level is actually underground, potentially carved directly out of bedrock. We can see a kind of shape that looks like egg cartons almost, with lumps and pits all throughout the entire area south of the pyramid. So we can tell that the structure is absolutely enormous. The scale of it is unbelievable. It's very clear exactly where this labyrinth is. And some of the earlier excavations had determined that it was completely destroyed and all that was left were these broken pieces of rubble of what was once the labyrinth. However, more recently, we've basically determined that this was incorrect. In fact, what was found was the roof of the upper level. So to get to the upper level, all we would have to do is clear sand away. To get to the lower level, we'd actually have to dig, potentially through bedrock. So essentially, Carmen Bolter presented some fantastic information that's a little harder to verify, but still interesting. But the Mataha expedition and the Polish group that Bill worked with at Hawara both essentially proved exactly the same thing and in the exact same way, and both brought forward undeniable ground-penetrating radar scans that prove the labyrinth does exist, it is there, and it is accessible too. The only obstacle to it is getting permission to work there. We know how to divert the water, all of that. So we would need some serious funding in order to do that project, and we would also need to coordinate it with the growing season of the local agriculture, because the farmers need the water table at a certain level in order to grow. But this could be easily enough arranged. We've actually been talking with Louis de Cordier in the last couple weeks, especially we're talking about joining forces so that we can help further raise awareness in the public mind about Hawara, tell the world the truth, and actually raise enough support to make this project happen so we can actually get down in there and access this library of extremely advanced knowledge from early Egypt.
But the Egyptians, like everywhere else in Egypt, what they know, they don't want anybody to know. That's the problem. And that's the headache that I have. And I have a lot of information, and I've said it, but the Egyptians do not deny it. They just do not comment. Mm-hmm. So that's our story of Hawara, and we did the conference in 2009, and like I said, we've not been back since. So I've been back a couple of times to visit, take a couple of people, talk about it. Every time I go, all of the people there say, Mr. Brown, oh yeah, no problem, come on, that kind of thing. So we can talk about some things that I would like to go up and say, okay, I keep saying to the guy, have you dug here yet? And they're like, no, well, I know they have. Okay, just like everywhere else, okay. So we know that the Egyptians are accessing this, but they're not doing it publicly, so they do not have to release the information. And they're doing a lot of that here at Giza. Mm-hmm. And that's why I'm here.
Zahi offered you a job after that, right?
Oh yeah, he offered me a job right on the spot. I gave him my report and everything, and I denied. I said no. He asked me why, and I said because if I work for him and the Egyptians, I'm not allowed to say anything. They have to say it. And if I say it, I have to get permission to say it to even release it. And they don't allow for it. So I just stay as an independent consultant engineer. I say whatever I want, and it doesn't matter whether the Egyptians deny it or not. And it's very funny that most of the time they do not deny. We're here to get the information. We can't make it public. We have to take it to the authorities, etc. And we want them to come and do it and get the credit for it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So this is proof that Dr. Hawass respected your work there, but even still, he denied your access at that certain point.
Yes, correct. In many cases, they do not officially recognize me, but on the side, drinking a beer, we have some really good stories. Okay, and Hawass knows me, and they follow me wherever I go. And in most cases, they keep their distance. Okay, and they let me do whatever I want.
Based on the scale of the Hawara Labyrinth and everything I've learned about it, I believe it may actually be essentially a backup copy of all the information that is written within the temples above ground in all of Upper Egypt, all of Lower Egypt at the pyramids. I believe it might be a backup copy of Egypt itself. So that's probably the function of why there are all these granite and marble chambers down there. It's probably the master copy of the Hall of Records. So the importance of Hawara can simply not be overstated. It's one of the most important sites in all of Egypt without a doubt, and the information that is stored in those underground chambers could absolutely alter the course of human history. It could be extremely important, and there may be artifacts and technology down there, for all we know, that could alter the course of human history. So we've got a really good shot of finally bringing this to the public attention, getting the support, raising the funding, making this happen. And I think the more evidence we present, the harder it will be for the Ministry of Antiquities and Tourism to deny our project permit. So it's not just that we know the labyrinth exists and we know how to get into it, The bigger issue is that the site is actively being damaged by this water. They're not protecting the pyramid. They're letting it get destroyed by this water rather than admit to the world that it's real. So this is a really important issue we'd like to raise awareness of and bring attention to. However, it's not the end of the story. It's just one of the many aspects of Bill's story. And he ended up in 2009 going back to work at Giza more after the Hawara project ended. So in episode 2, we're going to get deep into what happened at Giza after the Hawara project, and the story took many unexpected, shocking turns at that point. In the next episode, we're not just revealing scan images of the ground, but actually photographs and video proof of the tunnels and chambers underneath the Giza Plateau.